Any thoughts about Hesiod's Theogony? What is the meaning of the Titans, and why is there a cycle of fighting between fathers and sons? Why does the Greek creation myth start with all sorts of cosmic forces like chaos or darkness and light? Then we get the Titans and some monsters. And finally, we get the gods and an establishment of divine order after the Titans are thrown down. Why do you think the Greeks believed in an interim set of divinities that had to be overthrown? This is great, and we should talk more about the Theogony as we sort of go through. But for now, in this mailbag question, those of you that don't know, the Theogony is one of Hesiod's two surviving full poems. Hesiod is an archaic poet, so back before the Hellenistic era, before the classical era where Aristotle was living and working, and even before that, we have the archaic period, and that's where we get people like Homer, whom we date to about the 8th century, or even perhaps the 7th century BC, and similarly Hesiod, who's kind of the slightly lesser known one, but still crucially central for Athenian society and Greek-speaking culture more generally. So Hesiod writes the Theogony and the Works and Days. Works and Days is like about sort of farming and human economy. The Theogony is from Theos, which is God, and Gonos, or Gigno, right, which is to kind of come into being. So the birth of the gods, right? And the reason I wanted to answer this question today is because Aristotle, in what I was reading, gives a little indication for us, I think, of one way that we can understand something like the Theogony, which is a very foreign kind of mythos to us in some ways. Even though we know a lot of Greek myths, we know about Hercules and the heroes, and we know about the Orpheus and these guys, generally, they're kind of in the cultural bloodstream. But these incredibly dark and strange and mysterious myths that come down to us, like Kronos eating his children, or Uranus, the sky, hiding his children away inside the earth, his wife. These sorts of things are just incredibly bonkers. They're so trippy. And you don't think about it because they're sort of, oh, Greek myths, yes, like very noble and whatever, but this stuff is gory and weird. And, Plato remarked upon it in Euthyphro. His Socrates sort of talks about how bad all the gods are in the Republic too, like this idea that the gods can do these nasty, violent things is quite scary. And so Aristotle has this really interesting comment when he talks about the idea that the gods have a king, right? He says, well, this is because we project onto our gods, right? We have this idea that our gods are like us, and we project not just the form of the human body, but actually the form of human life onto the community of the gods. Therefore, they must have had a king. And this is still something that we do. Thomas Aquinas gives a good reason for it, which is that, in fact, because we are images of God, we are inclined to make God an image of us, right? Sort of this reversal of the way that you do come to know God, which is through his creation. And so for me, one of the things that kind of helps is to think about, Jung, the famous psychoanalyst, said that the dreams we have are private myths. That is, they kind of give this allegorical shape to things that are happening in our subconscious. And Stephen Fry, the great comedian, but also sort of an amateur scholar, Stephen Fry says, well, that must mean that myths are public dreams. So I love this idea that the myth is a public dream. And in the Theogony, one of the things I notice about these father usurpation stories, besides the fact that, there was a lot of father usurpation, and that's just a general human anxiety, right, in our life now, right, that we want to propagate ourselves through time by having children, and yet we also worry that our children are going to rise up as we decline, and these things, of course, do happen, and that's part of life. So we have these anxieties about that, right? Whether as we decline, our children rise up, and this can be a joy to us, but it can also be an anxiety. But it's also, I think, in some ways, a different form of acknowledgement of what it says in Genesis when God says, "Cursed is the ground for your sake," that it will not raise up fruits naturally and easily, but there will be brambles and thistles, and your work will not always produce the good products because of sin, right? And this is not how the sort of Greek attitude perceives it, but the Greek attitude perceives the same idea, and that's why in the Theogony, that's why heaven, Uranus, shuts up the womb of Gaia, of Earth, is because she starts producing ugly and nasty stuff, and this is kind of a horror to everybody, right? They start to emerge these ugly realities and the kind of tempests and torments and all these things, and he basically shuts her up for that. And she, of course, is therefore she does violence to her in this way. But I think it's a kind of recognition of the inherent brokenness of the world, right? It's this sense that like the system should work great. You should produce children, the children should be great. Then you put seeds in the ground produces seeds, this ought to be fine, but it's a way of encapsulating the sense that that system, which we can see how it should work, doesn't work in quite the way that we would like to, and this produces all this pain. And for the Judeo-Christian tradition, that the blame for that, the onus for that falls on us, and for the Greek tradition, the onus for that in some ways falls on the gods. And this is a fundamental difference between the two, right? So you know which one I believe, right? I think that it's original sin that causes this to be. But anybody who has ever thought seriously, or even any culture that has reckoned seriously with human life, has had some way of expressing this fact that the ground which should produce grapes and fruit produces thistles and thorns. And I suspect that a lot of these kind of chthonic myths, these very early myths about the chaos and the origin of the world in Greek culture, come from that awareness.